Welcome to 10 Things You Don't Know About Structured Data. My name is Martha Van Berkel, and I'm the CEO here at Schema app. When I introduce myself, I like to introduce myself with a knowledge graph and explain that, I'm an alumni of Cisco. I spent 14 years there doing online support strategy as well as product management, that I'm an alumni of Queen's University and MIT, that I have a very technical background in mathematics and engineering, as well as strategy and innovation. I'm the co-founder of Schema app. I'm Canadian, and I used to own this awesome car that was an Austin Healey Sprite. And my actual car was in the movie Losing Chase, which was directed by Kevin Bacon. And Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. And the reason I share that is that you have now inferred that you are 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon, since I'm 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon. And the same inference that you just did for Kevin Bacon is the same type of inferencing that Google does when it's trying to figure out what is the best answer in order to provide searchers. Today, we're going to talk about schema markup and structured data, and I'll use those perhaps interchangeably. Although I do prefer schema markup because it's actually meant to disambiguate the definition of things. And structured data can be lots of different things. It can be data structured in a table. So I tend to prefer the schema markup. And if you're not familiar with it, it's what helps search engines truly understand the content so that it can best match things with the searcher's intent and also reward you with rich results. So let's go through our 10 things. The first one is that there's ROI, or return on investment, beyond just the rich results. And this is a theme that's really been coming up just in the past couple of months, where John Mueller in a video states that, it's not just about rich results, but really promoting understanding, which there's great value to. And in our work with customers from small, medium business all the way up through large enterprise, but specifically focused on enterprise clients, we're seeing outstanding results, not just in impressions and click-through rates, so the kind of front end of the funnel, but all the way through that customer journey, including impact to rank, but also more interaction with the content, more time on the sites, and eventually even higher revenue. Now, this past spring, in May 2019, Google announced that they had a specific motivation for continuing to invest in structured data. And it was during Google I/O that they talked about how users are trying to reach out at different moments and through different services. So different times of their life, of their day, and through different devices, surfaces. Think of it, your phone, your car. And so it's a great opportunity for us as content creators, but building and maintaining those customer experiences is really hard and a lot of work. And so they said, this is why they're doing structured data, that if we focus on building amazing content and translating it into structured data, that Google will help you then reach those users across those different surfaces and those different experiences. So amazing. What it means is that when you've optimized with structured data, that you've actually optimized not only for search, but also for voice. The second thing I want to talk about is errors and warnings and content strategy. So the schema markup process starts with strategy, and then you go into authoring, where you create the schema markup or the JSON-LD. You then have to get it onto the site through deployment, and then over time you'll need to maintain it, either if you get new results or new content or changes to the layouts of your page, kind of report and analyze it, and then you kind of go back to strategy. And it's an iterative process. And when you get Google errors and warnings, often it doesn't actually mean that there's anything wrong with your structured data. It just means that the required and recommended fields that they're looking for in order to present to you and for you to qualify for those rich results aren't being met. And so when you get a warning or an error, you actually can just say oh, we actually need to then address the fact that that content isn't visible on the page. And then once you get that, you can add the content, optimize it, and get rid of those errors and warnings. So while the Google errors and warnings means that your eligibility for those rich results could be at risk, it doesn't actually mean that there's anything wrong with how you've written your structured data. And one of the examples that I gave was recently that you also don't want to add content that's inappropriate. So in this case, the agency was optimizing a site about hay, and it was giving them a warning about a SKU missing. Well, hey doesn't have a SKU, so it doesn't really, isn't really relevant with regards to the warning, and isn't even a piece of content that you'd want to add. The other piece is, for example, I don't put a salary on our job postings. And so that's a choice I'm making from the business not to include that information. And so again, that would be an error warning that I would just dismiss because it's not appropriate to our content. All right, number 3, things that you don't know about structured data. So let's talk a little bit about schema.org extensions and actions. So the schema.org extensions are entire vocabularies that have been written for specific areas of the industry. So there's one for automotive, one for health and life science, one that's just started around the Internet of Things, and then also bibliographics around library sciences. And then finance, which is also sometimes referred to as FIBO, has actually been merged into the overall schema.org vocabulary. And so this is where there's even more specific language that you can use to describe things within these other industries. And so if ever you're trying to describe perhaps even like a business, but it's a medical business, or I'm talking about an article, but it's a medical article, you can actually look at schema.org for specific examples or specific what we call classes that describe those things within those industries. The other piece, and these are sort of hugely underutilized, is around actions. And so there are, many, I think there's like 14 specific actions that you can use. Here's a list of some of them, like, so create action, find action, play action, search action. And I think these are going to become more relevant as we start interacting through these different surfaces, because you won't always be sort of looking at it with your eyes on a browser on your computer. You might be interacting with it through a voice channel or while you're driving in your car. And so the actions that you can take, or that you'll have, your assistant will give you options for, can actually be defined in the structured data so that you can have that interaction. And so an area that I would encourage you to have a look at, that again sort of allows that user to take that clickbait into action, but also being understood and relevant across any surface. All right, number 4, and probably my favorite, connected schema markup. And the reason I like to talk about this in an area that you don't know is that, a lot of people, when they're doing structured data, are really just looking at trying to get those rich results. Game over, I'm done. I get to just, keep working on my stuff. But the fact is that in order to get to what John Mueller was talking about, understanding, you actually have to connect the dots in order to help understand the context of how things are connected. So for example, in my introduction, know how I'm connected to MIT and Schema App and Kevin Bacon. And so you can do the same thing with your content. So what I thought I'd go through here is give you some tips on what not to do, and then also some tools in order for you to figure out how to really make sure that you're fully optimizing on how information is connected. So the first thing, do not put the same schema markup on every page. And here I'm not saying that, you can't have like optimize all your articles about articles. No, absolutely. If it's an article, optimize it for an article or a blog posting. But I'm talking about sort of plugins or other things that put organization markup on every page. And the reason this is a no-go is because if the same markup describing exactly the same thing is on every page, then you actually don't know what page is really talking about that thing. And since we want you to be really specific so that we can bring clarity on what it is, you don't want to be sort of doing a peanut butter approach to that schema markup. The other thing is you don't want to create islands of schema markup. And so that would be sort of like creating your, locations and your organization and your products and not describing how they're connected. I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that appropriately. Because the most important thing you can do with your schema markup is make sure that you're telling the story. You're explaining how these things are all connected. And this is really what then yields a knowledge graph. So when everyone's talking about knowledge graphs, it's not just like doing schema markup, but doing proper schema markup where it's all really well connected. So in this case, we're describing the organization. In this case, it was a company that had rented apartment complexes. We talked about how it had these different offices, but the Canadian office specifically had apartment complexes that had reviews, videos, and ratings. And that apartment complex then had a multi-type entity, apartments that were for rent, hence also a product, that then had these additional features and properties. And so you really want to explain how these things are connected. And so let me give you some examples. So here we're going to look at a food establishment with amazing marketing video on it. How do we actually say how those things are connected? Because we don't want to have two entities where we have just a video and just a food establishment. We want to make sure that ideally they're embedded. And so if you go to Schema app, we have a free tool. So if you go under resources, tools, and go to Schema Paths. And Schema Paths was developed by my co-founder, Mark, when he got really tired of going to schema.org, trying to figure out how he was going to relate two different things. And so within Schema Paths, you can actually just pick the two different classes. So in this case, a food establishment and a video object, and then it will tell you how you can relate those two things. So for example, for subject of, is the appropriate way for a food establishment is the subject of the video. And so this would be a really clean way of doing it so that the primary entity on the page is around the food establishment. It's a page about the restaurant or the market in that case. And then embedded in that would be subject of, and then you would link to the data item or link to the object of video object. Now you can relate it the other way. So if the page was primarily about the video object, then you might use about and say, oh, that's primarily about this video. Maybe it's like I'm showing you my portfolio of work, and that the video then is about the food establishment. And that way I'm being very clear as to which one is the primary entity of page, which I'll cover in a bit. Let's look at a couple other examples. So a financial service, services in a financial organization. So again, if we were looking at organization and service, so the financial organization offers financial services. Here, Schema Paths tells me that there isn't really a clean way of identifying how the organization connects to that service. So instead, we would do it at the service level, and we would say that the service is provided by the organization. All right, next, probably my favorite, a volcano and a gas station. Yes, there are two Schema.org classes for these two things. And so again, if you relate it, the volcano can contain a gas station. Sounds kind of explosive, probably not realistic. Or that the gas station has an area served, which is the volcano. So maybe in Pompeii, just outside Vesuvius, there's a gas station which has this area served, which would then be a great way to link those two. So you can see, you can really much link anything. I linked a volcano and a gas station. The other suggestion we have is to use very strong connectors. So as you're looking at linking things, use things such as about, mentions, subject of, and has part. Let me show you some examples. So in this news article, we would want to be very clear that it's about Jack Ward the cowboy, and ideally use like a Wikipedia entry in order to define who he is. In this news article, you could say that it mentions Interstate 10 and also avocados, again, sort of starting to link key topics that were going on within the article. And in this news article, you could say it's the subject of the video object, the bees, and this is where sort of the beehives got burned. Now, a more advanced option is this example, which was a very long web page that talked about a specific service that was being delivered. And on the page are many FAQs about that service, as well as blogs related to the service. And so what we said is that we're going to say it's a collection page because it's got many different things. Use a very strong connector about, so it's about the service, and then has part FAQ, and then the FAQ has parts, questions, and accepted answers, and then it mentions these blog postings. And so you can see the strong connectors are the about, and then the less strong ones, has part and mentions, allows us to make sure that we're still getting that rich result for the FAQ, but that it's all nicely connected, and so Google really understands how this information is related. All right, number 5, main entity of page. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but main entity of page is really identifying the primary topic of the page. So this often comes out if there's like different schema markup data items on a page. So you could have, it's like a news article, there's a video, they haven't been embedded. And so it's like, what is this about? Or on a previous example I gave of this, there was, it was an event site. They had 5 different events on 5 different days, but like, what's the primary event that we're talking about? And so what you can do is if there are different items on the page, ideally you've like embedded them and linked them like we just talked about. But in this case, like if you don't, which one of these is actually the main entity of the page, the primary thing that is the primary topic of the page? And in order to identify that, what you can do is use the property main entity of page and add in the URL of the page that it's on. Now you would only pick one of these to do it on, and then that would actually indicate to Google that this is the main topic of that page. All right, number 6, multi-type entities. This is where I talked about, you can actually merge, 2 different schema.org classes, and use properties across both of them. And so where we see this really common is like a house for sale, or a house for rent, as you saw in my previous example, where there's like it's a product and a single family home, or a comedy event on air is a comedy event and a broadcast event, or a book for sale is both a product and a book. And you really want to do this only when it like adds more clarity. So a hotel for rent is a product and a hotel room. And so multi-type entities are sort of where you merge those two. I believe Schema App's one of the only tools out there that allows you to do this, both within our editor as well as in our highlighter. So one page at a time or across many. Number 7, additional type. So additional type also adds clarity to a schema.org type that maybe isn't in the vocabulary. And I always joke that like there's no local business for a marketing agency, even though like digital marketing agencies are a lot of the people who are doing schema markup. And so in this example, we're actually going to look at an orthodontist, hence the smiling face. And you would identify the type. So in this case, it would be a dentist. And then for additional type, I would use a Wikipedia entry to define more exactly what type of dentist I want. So think of this as a way to further clarify the type that you're using within schema.org. Now, I was in Texas when I first presented this, so it's like, oh, it's a Texas Longhorn. So it's not just a thing, there's no animal in schema.org. And so what I could do is use additional type and use the Wikidata entry. And the Wikidata is even more specific than Wikipedia, since Wikipedia is often localized for different languages. But when you see a number like this, it means it's like identifying the entity in the Wikidata database, which then populates the Wikipedias. And so in this case, I'm saying it's not just a thing, it is very much a Texas Longhorn as defined by that Wikidata entry. All right, additional property. Additional property allows you basically to use like free variables, within, to further describe something within usually a product or so forth. And so in this case, we're going to look at a camera, and a camera, like you might want to call out some specific features about, such as like the number of megapixels. And so in this case, you would use additional property, and you would create a data item using property value. And property value is really like a property value pair. So it's where you can then say like, oh, well, I'm going to define relationships between a variable and what its actual number or quantity is. And there are some set things already set in here, like a max value, measurement type, min value, etc., name. And you always want to include name and then value. Those would be like the minimum. And then if you can find a unit code, so in this case, there's like a UN CFACT code for megapixels, you can also sort of go above and beyond and use that. Number 9, using lists and different kinds of lists. So there's, the basic kind of lists, like a breadcrumb list and a how-to section and a how-to step and an offer catalog. And so I just thought I'd clarify like when to use these lists. So an item list is a list of any type of thing. An offer catalog is a list of offerings, which is like a list of products. So if you had like a landing page on your store, you would have an offer catalog. And then a collection page is really interesting because it can kind of put a container around a list and then allow you to connect it. And we saw this example when I showed this previously, where this collection page allows us to kind of have lists within it, but then also use strong feature or properties such as like about and mentions. And number 10 is that, structured data really goes beyond search. It can also help you structure other things like your analytics. And so actually Schema app recently released their trend report for all our clients. So this replaced the Google structured data report that used to be in Search Console and allows you to kind of track over time your schema markup. And then we also have an offering called Enhanced Analytics, which allows you to take the schema markup that you've built and add any property into Google Analytics and soon into Adobe Analytics. And so in this example, we wanted to ask the question of like, which author gets the best results? And so what we've done is we've taken the schema markup out of our WordPress plugin, loaded it programmatically into Google Analytics, and lo and behold, Martha and Schema, who Mark says is him, but in his admin mode, should continue to write a lot of content because they're the ones who drive the most sessions within the website. And so you can imagine that like there's a lot of insights that you can start getting now from your search data if you reuse that structured data. And if you're interested to learn more, feel free to reach out to us at Schema. We're happy to show you sort of more about enhanced analytics. So that's the 10 things I had about structured data to help you better understand sort of all the things that you can do beyond the basics and beyond just feature hunting. And if you have any questions or are really passionate about learning more about structured data or how Schema app does structured data at scale, feel free to check out our other resources under resources, tools, and webinars. Other really helpful pieces around how to do a schema markup strategy, how to articulate the ROI of doing schema markup are all available there. Or you can reach out to me directly and explore how you might want to partner with the world's experts at doing schema markup at scale on any platform for any type of content. Thanks and have a great day. Happy schemaing.